This is Castle Freak on our 31 spooky movies of Halloween. Castle Freak is one of those underrated gems of 90s horror that feels like it should have been discovered in a dusty VHS bin in some abandoned video store. Directed by Stuart Gordon, yes, the Reanimator Stuart Gordon, this film manages to combine gothic atmosphere, gross-out horror, and family drama into something that is simultaneously compelling, uncomfortable, and occasionally funny. Set in a decaying Italian castle, because why not? This film follows an American family who's inherited the place only to discover that they're not alone. Oh, and the other resident, let's just say, he's not the welcoming type. The plot, which mixes tragedy, madness, and a bit of a morality tale, is surprisingly effective. It's got a slow burn quality that feels more like classic gothic horror than your typical 90s slasher fare, and there's some real tension here, and the film doesn't shy away from exploring the psychological effects of grief and guilt. The castle itself also becomes a character, with its ominous halls and shadowy corners, which gives the movie this rich, atmospheric quality. It's the kind of place where you half expect to see Christopher Lee lurking behind a candelabra. Speaking of the horror, the creature design is fantastic. The titular freak, disgusting, grotesque, and exactly what you want from a practical effects team in the 1990s. The makeup is so detailed and gross that it almost becomes hypnotic, like you know you should probably look away, but it's so expertly crafted that you can't help but stare. It's a masterclass in creature makeup reminiscent of the gnarly monsters you'd find in 70s and 80s horror. The way the freak moves, hides in the shadows, and stalks his prey gives this film a genuinely creepy edge that modern horror movies often lack. And you know, I'm gonna talk about the real star of this movie, Jeffrey freaking Combs. If you're even remotely familiar with his work, you know that he brings a unique brand of intensity to every role, and here, as the tortured and guilt-ridden father, he delivers in spades. I mean, sure, he's hammy at times, but that's part of the charm of this film. He overacts in all the right ways. His exaggerated facial expressions and melodramatic delivery are exactly the kind of thing that this film needs. You can tell he knows his material is a bit ridiculous, but instead of dialing it back, he leans into it hard like a truck going into a skid. And honestly, the film is all the better for it. Watching him scream, cry, and wrestle with his inner demons is nothing short of entertaining. The cinematography deserves praise as well. Gordon really knew what he was going for with the visuals here. The movie feels like a love letter to old Hammer horror films. Dark, moody, drenched in shadows, the castle with its cobweb-covered corners and flickering candlelight is as much of a character as the freak himself. There's something wonderfully nostalgic about the way it's shot, harkening back to an era where horror relied more on atmosphere than cheap jump scares. This movie is a slow burn, but it's the kind that feels deliberate. Like a fine wine, aging in some musty, stinky cellar, you're meant to soak in the dread. While the film gets so much right, it's hard to ignore the giant, sleazy elephant in the room, and that is the gratuitous exploitation of the female cast. Let's get real here. The sexual violence, unnecessary nudity, and overall objectification of women, it feels completely out of place and, to be frank, utterly repulsive. It's like someone decided that since they were making a horror movie, they had to shoehorn in some exploitive moments. And to be honest, in a movie that looks this deliberate and assembled with this much care, these parts feel lazy and they feel gross. The female characters are either undressed, distressed, or violently attacked, and none of it adds to the plot. In fact, in my opinion, it actually detracts from it. It feels like the movie is trying to be edgy, but instead it just comes off as cringe and offensive. The story would have been just as disturbing, if not more so, without all the sleaze and exploitation. I've said it before. The thing that we conjure up here when we don't see it is far more disturbing than what we actually see on the screen. The exploitation of the women also takes away from what is utterly an engaging horror story. You're caught up in the mystery, the suspense, and then, bam, you're hit with another scene that feels like it was solely designed for shock value. Oh no, another bloody pair of boobies. I'm totally shocked. I can't believe the movie went this far to do this. I'm just so shocked. And this is a shame because Castle Freak has all the makings of a cult classic, but these moments of unnecessary sexual violence and objectification, they leave a sour taste in your mouth. It's distracting and makes you wish the filmmakers had dialed it back just a lot. In all, Castle Freak is, in my opinion, a mixed bag. On one hand, it's got Jeffrey Combs hamming it up in the best possible way, a creepy monster, a rich gothic atmosphere that will make you nostalgic for the days of Hammer, and on the other hand, it's bogged down by some really gross and, in my opinion, misogynistic exploitation of its female characters. It's like you're watching two movies, one that's a love letter to classic horror and the other that's stuck in the worst tropes of the genre. So is it worth a watch? Well, if you can stomach the gross bits, absolutely. The movie has undeniable quality. It's a pretty good movie at heart, but it is really hard to ignore the sleaze. But if you can, maybe you should consider putting Castle Freak on your list of 31 spooky movies of Halloween.